Greetings and salutations, all you beautiful individuals. This is another epi of the League Unlocked. My name is Eric Kleinhan. So on today's episode, as we are remembering some of the craziest, wildest, most unbelievable off-season rides that we have had over the past better part of a decade, well over a decade now, that we've at least had some degree of off-season madness. Obviously in the earlier days, the mid-2010s, they weren't as insane, and of course this comes at a time where we had one of the most surprising moves of the off-season that most people probably did not see coming, and that is Guma Yushi going over to Hanwha Life Esports. This is, when you look at this offseason as a whole, it's by no means the craziest. A lot of the big teams kept their core together or just straight up kept the entire roster. If you're looking at squads like G2, Gen G, T1 makes one change coming in, even though that one change is absolutely insane because everybody thought Guma Yushi, looking like the face of the organization in a post-Faker era, if that ever actually comes to be. But this is a guy who has bled red for T1, loves the fan base despite all of the insane criticism and vitriol that he has been the recipient of from these, we know, very fanatic and fervorous T1 members, or not members, fans, excuse me. The members love him, he loves the organization, blah, blah, blah. He's gone, and that is not a theme that is new to the LoL esports scene, to the esports scene, to sports in general. Somebody that you expect to see their entire career with an individual squad ends up not happening in the slightest. And it's a little different than when you talk about Zeus the year before, because I think it felt, I don't want to say disconnected, but it felt like more of a possibility that Zeus would step out of that T1 shadow cast upon him to kind of stand on his own 2 feet and prove on a different team that he is still one of, if not the best top laner on the planet. And for the most part, he did that on Hanwha Life, even though they didn't win a world championship. You know, they won first stand. They had many, many accolades and degrees of success, and maybe it just felt like there's no way they could keep this Exodia comp together after winning that 2024 World Championship, and it kind of felt like Guma would maybe, I mean, he already kind of took a pay cut, maybe to stay with the squad, to be competitive, but I'll tell you what, he's most definitely still going to be competitive on that Hanwha Life roster. So we're looking at 5 insane off seasons that happened, and we've got 2 here to kick things off. The one I just mentioned, which is 2025, and then the 2017 off season. And again, it's really, if you look at all of the major regions, 2017 wasn't that crazy. It was really specifically 2 key points, and that is the ROX Tigers breaking up entirely the 5 starters that were iconic from 2016 when you're talking Smeb, Peanut, Kuro, Prey, and Gorilla in that bot lane. They all go to the wayside, and that itself kind of set the stage for what would become the KT Rolster super team, with Smeb uniting with Deft, Mata, and Pawn joining score on that squad. So the KT super team of 2017 plus ROX breaking up, Peanut goes to SKT. That's really just one team blowing up, and that's setting the stage for a pretty wild LCK specific off season. But again, in the other major regions, you look at squads like G2 and like TSM of the time. TSM ran it back for 2017, except Wild Turtle subbed in for Spring because Doublelift took a break. G2 was pretty much the same. Well, Sven and Mythy come, so maybe that was somewhat of a crazy season coming in. But for the most part, it was really just the LCK specifically, and specifically that ROX Tigers and KT Rolster squad that really, threw a wrench or completely exploded what happened over in the LCK. But we got 4 actually insane off seasons that did go down, and we start with the first year of franchising in the LCS. We're going back to 2018, and this, you can call it the beginning of the end of TSM as an organization, or you can call it the beginning of a Team Liquid dynasty. I think both of those statements would probably be true. But LCS Franchising, there were new teams that came in. Optic comes in, 100 Thieves, all these new franchises. It's an exciting time, and there was shift within the within the LCS as a whole, and of course players coming in from abroad. Obviously TSM, this is the Sven and Mithy era. Mike Young gets the insane amount of pressure to be the starting jungler for the iconic Team Solo Mid, and much like KT or the Rocks Tigers kind of blowing up, that TSM core that had just been dominating the LCS for the better parts of 2 years, but 2 straight disappointments at the World Championship, which means that talent gets exploded. So Sven and Mithy come in because Doublelift goes over to Team Liquid to join Impact, Xmithie, Paul Belter, and Ole at the time, which would win back-to-back titles. And Sven Skarin, again formerly of TSM, saying he's the issue, goes to Cloud9, and what does he do? He doesn't win a title, but he wins an MVP and proceeds to have a top 4 finish at the World Championship. So TSM imploding in on itself, rebuilding completely around Bjergsen, which again, still always a good choice to keep Bjergsen on the squad, but the shells of that team would actually go on to level up the entirety of the LCS around them. And on the EU side of things, we had the new era of G2 as Sven and Mithy leave, Hjarnan and Wadid come in, and Jankos and Wonder, more importantly. It's very interesting parallels you had at this time between Perkz and Bjergsen, the iconic cornerstones of their organizations, and the roster being completely revamped around them, and both of them end up not delivering domestically, but at least on the G2 side, we have the Omega upset against RNG at the World Championship, whereas TSM does not even make Worlds for the first time in their organization's history. But either way, there's no question it was something new in the air in the LCS with all these changes happening, and even in Europe you had that bit of change for G2. Fnatic ran it back with the core, but this was the debut of Whippo for Fnatic because Soez got injured, and that was less of an off-season type of move. Number 3, crazy wild off-season ride of a year is the earliest one, and really the first time that you actually felt off-seasons be kind of insane, and that is 2014 going into the 2015 season. If you're an old head, you will remember this as the Korean Exodus, and this is something that we still feel the reverberations of to this day in the LPL, and that's with so many Korean players playing over there. That was not the case prior to 2015, but the blow up was absolutely insane. You had the entire defending World Championship roster of Samsung White blowing up. Looper, Dandy, Pawn, Imp, and Mata all not just leaving Samsung White, but going to other regions. We know Deft would also leave, but the entire world champion team, going to different squads isn't unheard of. Usually you can't hold on to the same roster, can't afford the salaries, but all of them going to different regions, primarily the LPL, is the craziest part of it. This was the way to level up the LPL to compete with the LCK, is just get LCK players over there. It still took 3 years. It was 3 straight all LCK matchups in the finals before we did get 2018 IG winning. But on top of the Samsung White squads, you had Kakao and Rookie leaving KT to join Invictus Gaming. Flame went over to the LPL. Imp, as I mentioned, went over to LGD. Even Piglet and Impact leave to go play in the LCS. So Deft going to EDG as well, set the stage for EDG being a powerhouse squad, but this set the precedent for a lot of contending LPL teams, and it's still kind of a meme today to have 5 actual domestic Chinese players on an LPL squad, because there's never been a mid laner from outside of South Korea to win a world championship, which is still a mind-blowing stat, even though there's been many, really 3 LPL teams to win a championship. But it's, again, most of the top LPL teams have at least 1, usually 2 Korean players on it. There's been exceptions, of course, some prime RNG and BLG squads that were 5 Chinese players, but for the most part, unbelievable. not precedent, but impact that this exodus had on years and years to come in the LCK, even though SKT just proceeded to kind of dumpster the league for a couple years before the LPL eventually evened out. But now it's a mainstay thing to see some star LCK players head over to the LPL to get an absolutely absurd payday from a top tier team. 2014 holds nothing to what happened later on down the line when we are talking about, I don't know, maybe something like 2021, when you say, wait, 2021, okay, what went down here? This is the impossible, unbelievable betrayal of a few iconic players, and the betrayal kind of goes both ways, because this is the offseason where not only do we see Perkz leave G2 to return to the mid lane to go over to Cloud9, but to replace him, we have Rekkles going to arch nemesis enemy number 1, leaving Fnatic to go to G2, and this is Rekkles leaving after an impeccable 2020 World Championship performance where they nearly took down Top Esports to advance. So they had an incredible run. Rekkles and Hylissang were fantastic, so this was still peak Rekkles heading over to G2, and I think what people forget is, by the way, he won MVP in the first split. People love to say, what a wash of a year, Rekkles is terrible, blah, blah, blah. He won MVP in the spring split. But the betrayal here, sure, Perkz leaving G2 to go to the LCS and Rekkles leaving to go to the main rivals, but both of them eventually get kind of screwed over. Perkz got a bit screwed over leaving G2, and Rekkles, we know how the sad trajectory goes post G2, where again, they're in contract jail, it's impossible to move on, yada, yada, yada. It's tough sledding for them, and it was a little bit unfair. And if you recall, Perkz had $5 million contract for about a 2-year thing that he doesn't even end up finishing, and Rekkles to G2, it's a little bit more murky what the actual contract details were. But those were the headliners for this offseason, but arguably got even more insane, or at least the other things were kind of swept under the rug, such as Doublelift and Bjergsen retiring. Bjergsen coaches TSM. That would be big news on any other given offseason. And then TSM signing Huni, and the bigger one, Sword Art, to one-up the Perkz contract for Cloud9, the old $6 million deal. He ends up only being on TSM for 11 months, not even a full year, and one of the all-time worst contracts. And this kind of carries on from the 2018, the beginning of the end of TSM. The Sword Art deal was the writing's on the wall. They last a couple more years, but this was done and dusted, doomed. Getting a guy who just went to the World Finals, credit where credit's due, Sword Art on Suning, but you know he wasn't worth that money. TSM knew it. I feel like they thought they could get some kind of magic, but this is all the same offseason. And then the other, again, usual heavy hitters. You had Khan going over to Dom1. Team Liquid gets Alfari. Nuguri goes to FPX as Khan replaces him. Viper goes over to the LPL on EDG. Chovy and Deft join Hanwha Life together. And you even had Xiaohu role swapping to the top lane. This was all within one offseason, and I think now, in hindsight, the Rekkles and Perkz moves got all of the attention, and rightfully so, because they were absolutely insane. And I remember Mark and I both saying at the start of that offseason, there's no way Rekkles goes to G2 or Perkz goes to North America. Of course, ended up being wrong on both of those. That's the only time we've ever been wrong on this show, by the way. Absolutely incredible how consistent we've been. But 2021 was absolutely insane, but still not quite as insane as what we were getting in the 2019 season, where you're talking about... and this is comparable. 2021 was pretty insane, but I still think the bomb of Caps leaving Fnatic to go to G2 and Perkz role swapping. I remember when this was rumored, it sounded completely made up, and there was no way that this would actually happen. But yes, it did, and G2 would go on to have far and away the best year from a Western squad of all time. It still has not been close to matched, and that was obviously an Omega move in the offseason that shaped the league for half a decade to come from there, as everyone was just excited for Caps. He was just showing these signs of being an absolute elite mid laner who just beat Perkz in the playoffs in the year before, and then he joins him and Perkz says, yeah, I'll go to 80 carry. And you remember Perkz was gapping some star 80 carries throughout that year. But On top of that insane signing, this was the entire revamp and rebrand. SKT becomes T1 after their far and away worst year in franchise history in 2018. They bring in Khan, Teddy, Mata, and Klid to run it back again for Grandpa Faker. We were calling him Grandpa in 2019. He'd go on to win 3 Worlds after that, but they won back-to-back LCK titles. Didn't make an international final, unbelievably. Lost to G2 in both semifinals at Worlds and the midseason invitational, but still, this entire roster announcement for T1 breathed new life into the T1 fan base to see Faker actually have some capable players around him. And then you move on. This is a rare offseason, again, like 2021, where you had multiple regions firing bangers. EU, we got Caps to G2, Perkz, role swap, T1, full revamp, and then you go LCS, which all of a sudden became a world champion retirement home when you had Core JJ joining Team Liquid for the first time. His buddy Crown joins Optic. Bang joins 100 Thieves. All of a sudden, we're doing LCS teaser videos that need closed captions. Guys are doing close-ups of their rings, their world championship title rings, and it was a complete refueling, revamping of the LCS. Even had Gorilla joining Misfits over in EU. All these star LCK players joining Western organizations, and this was still a relatively new thing to actually have star players coming over. I know Impact and Piglet did it earlier in the LCS days, but this is when it really became the norm, and haven't really looked back since then in the LCS. Pretty much always have at least 1 or 2 imported players on a roster, so 2019 is kind of where you can look at where that happened. It obviously ended up being, even Broken Blade comes over to TSM. I know that's not an LCK import, but BB comes over, has 2 fantastic years on TSM, and kind of, gets him another opportunity over in Europe. But there were so many changes heading into 2019. It obviously ended up just being Team Liquid dominating yet again. Spoilers, Core JJ is an MVP when he comes over and has still got it despite a bad 2018 for Gen G. But Caps to G2, obviously the big headliner here. And how about Perkz being the main headliner on 2 different years, and the 2 most insane off seasons that we've talked about have Perkz in some way, shape, or form part of that headline. I'm not sure we'll get any off season as insane as 2021 and 2019 because it was multiple regions. Again, Guma Yushi going to Han was crazy. You might have one move that's wild, but it felt like the checkbooks were a little bit more empty, at least in the LCS back then, compared to what they are now, and even less since the debacle that was the LTA rebrand. So pocketbooks not as thick as they used to be, which makes me think we will not have the insanity that we had in years past, but there's still always something to look forward to and a fresh dose of hopium heading into the year whenever we get these off-season news, rumors, and roster changes. But that is it today for League Unlocked. My name is Eric. Thank you to all you stunners for hanging out as always, and you know we will catch you on that flippity flip.